Welcome, everyone. You are joining us for a brand new deep dive into some honestly, truly mind-bending source material today.
It really is. And we're focusing on excerpts from a deeply fascinating book called Limitless Mind.
Right, a guide to remote viewing and transformation of consciousness.
Exactly. It's written by a physicist named Russell Targ. And for those of you listening who love to explore the absolute outer edges of what human beings are capable of, you are definitely going to want to settle in for this one.
Yeah, because it's a profound piece of work. And what makes it so compelling is, well, the background of the author himself.
Right, Targ isn't just a theorist. For decades, he was a senior research physicist at the Stanford Research Institute.
SRI?
SRI, exactly. And during the Cold War, he actually co-founded this highly classified government-funded program investigating psychic abilities.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. Specifically, they were looking at remote viewing, and they were doing this for the intelligence community. We are talking about the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the NSA.
Which, I mean, that immediately sounds like the plot of a science fiction movie.
Or a tense 1970s espionage thriller.
Totally.
Yeah.
But the sources we have today are not fiction. They are grounded in decades of rigorous, peer-reviewed laboratory data. So the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this incredible intersection.
The place where quantum physics, ancient mysticism, and government-funded psychic research all collide.
Yes. We want to figure out, based on Targ's extensive research, if our minds truly transcend the physical boundaries of space and time.
And his ultimate conclusion goes far beyond just espionage or Cold War tactics. He argues that understanding these abilities isn't about parlor tricks.
Or spying on foreign missile silos.
Right. It's fundamentally about discovering who we really are as conscious beings in this universe.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Uh,
If we were to distill the core argument of Limitless Mind into a simple summary, just a plain language baseline for you listening before we get into the heavy physics, it's basically this. The book argues, backed by all this statistical data from SRI, that human consciousness is what physicists call non-local.
Non-local.
Essentially, this means our minds are not trapped inside our physical skulls. They're not confined by physical space, and they aren't even confined by linear time.
And because of this non-locality, humans naturally possess abilities like remote viewing, which is the ability to perceive distant places, and precognition, sensing the future.
And even distant healing.
Exactly. Ultimately, Targ believes that realizing separation is an illusion is the master key to spiritual awakening.
It's the realization that we actually are the love we spend our whole lives seeking.
That simple summary beautifully captures the arc of Targ's journey. I mean, he started his career as a hard-nosed experimental physicist, developed early lasers, and eventually became a psychic spy researcher.
Quite the resume.
Yeah. And through the raw data he collected, he essentially found his way to a deeply spiritual realization. But to understand how he got there, and why this isn't taught in, say, every high school science class, we have to look at the scientific resistance he faced.
Oh, the pushback was immense.
Right.
The text spends a lot of time exploring the profound hubris of mainstream science when it comes to anomalies.
Which is so relatable. You always assume scientists are entirely open-minded, just following the data wherever it leads.
But Targ paints a very different picture of the establishment. He points out that throughout history, scientists had this really bad habit of claiming that physics is almost done.
They absolutely do. Targ points out the historical arrogance of protecting a paradigm. He brings up Lord Kelvin in the late 1800s.
Yeah, a massive figure in physics.
Huge. And Kelvin famously declared that the grand edifice of physics was basically complete except for, quote, 2 small clouds on the horizon that still needed explaining.
I love that phrasing. 2 small clouds. It sounds so dismissive. What were those clouds?
Well, the first cloud was the failure to detect the ether. At the time, physicists believed light had to travel through an invisible substance called the luminiferous ether.
Like how sound travels through air.
Exactly. But the famous Michelson-Morley experiment tried to measure the Earth moving through this ether and found absolutely nothing.
Just a void.
Right. And the second cloud was the failure of classical physics to predict the spectral distribution of blackbody radiation. Basically, how objects emit light when heated. Classical physics predicted an ultraviolet catastrophe that just didn't match reality.
So these weren't just small clouds at all.
Far from it. That first cloud led directly to Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity.
Wow.
And the second cloud led Max Planck to discover quantum mechanics. Kelvin's almost complete physics was actually on the verge of being completely overthrown.
Overthrown entirely.
Yeah, and Targ cites other examples too. A. Muckelson himself claimed that the most important fundamental laws of physical science had all been discovered. Even in 1980, the brilliant Stephen Hawking predicted the end of theoretical physics by the year 2000.
Which obviously didn't happen.
Right. Targ points this out to show how dangerous it is for the scientific establishment to lack awe and wonder. He argues that ignoring real, anomalous data like the overwhelming statistical evidence for extrasensory perception just to protect an existing worldview is fundamentally bad science.
And he uses a really brilliant analogy for this that stuck with me. He compares it to an airplane pilot.
Oh, this is a great analogy.
Imagine you're flying a commercial jet, and you have an air turbulence detector on your dashboard. Suddenly, a small, unpredictable signal starts fluctuating on the detector. But you look out the window, the sky is clear, and your current understanding of the weather says there shouldn't be any turbulence.
So you just ignore it.
You just ignore the anomalous data to protect your preconceived notion of the flight path. And ignoring that signal can cause the airplane to crash, which is something that has literally happened in aviation history.
Targ is saying modern physics is ignoring the turbulence detector.
Exactly.
It is a striking analogy, though to provide a balanced alternative interpretation here, we really should impartially note the pushback from the skeptical community.
We should.
The text acknowledges that organizations like CSICOP, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, and prominent skeptics like the magician known as the Amazing Randy, has historically attacked Targ's work relentlessly.
Relentlessly is the right word.
The skeptics argue that the burden of proof for overturning classical physics naturally invites and requires fierce pushback.
Which makes sense.
It does. If you're going to claim that minds can communicate across the globe instantaneously, you need more than just statistical significance. You need an irrefutable physical mechanism.
How does Targ handle that kind of criticism? Because some of those attacks from groups like CSICOP were deeply personal.
He's fairly dismissive of the extreme skeptics. He calls them mind manipulators who are trying to induce an unresolvable guilt in parapsychologists.
Trying to keep them on the defensive.
Right, trying to keep them creatively unproductive by forcing them to constantly defend their basic methodology rather than pushing the research forward.
He even compares his position to historical figures like Galileo and Giordano Bruno, right?
Yeah, guys who faced the Inquisition for offering correct but highly unpopular scientific opinions about the Earth's motion.
That comparison made me pause for a second. I mean, I understand the frustration of having your data ignored, but comparing peer review and skeptical pushback to the Spanish Inquisition feels, well, a little heavy-handed.
A bit dramatic, sure.
Actually, the anthropologist Margaret Mead had a great response to him in the book.
She did.
She basically told him to stop complaining about his lack of acceptance because, after all, Giordano Bruno was literally burned at the stake in the 16th century for espousing the idea that all things are unified.
Having a paper rejected by a journal is not quite the same as being burned at the stake. Fair point. And Targ does take that to heart. He realizes he can't just complain about the resistance. He has to provide the physics to explain how these phenomena are possible.
Because he isn't claiming this is magic.
Not at all. He relies heavily on a concept in quantum mechanics known as non-locality.
I've heard this term thrown around a lot in pop science, usually right next to a picture of Einstein looking.
They were looking at the math of quantum mechanics, and they realized it predicted something impossible. It predicted that if you take two subatomic particles, let's say two twin photons of light, and you generate them from the exact same source, their properties are entangled.
Entangled meaning their fates are tied together.
Exactly. Now imagine you send those two photons flying off in completely opposite directions at the speed of light, let one travel to the other side of the laboratory, and let the other travel to the Andromeda galaxy.
Okay, vast distance.
According to the math, if you measure the polarization or spin of the photon in your lab, you instantly force the other photon in Andromeda to take on a corresponding state.
Instantly.
Instantly. The measurement of one immediately determines the state of the other. Einstein hated this. He famously called it spooky action at a distance.
Because it breaks the speed limit of the universe.
Right. He thought it exposed a fundamental flaw in quantum theory because nothing, not even information, is supposed to travel faster than the speed of light.
So Einstein thought the math was wrong, but who actually won that argument?
Quantum mechanics won.
Wow.
In the 1960s, a physicist named J.S. Bell came up with a mathematical theorem to test it, and by the 1970s and 80s, laboratory experiments unequivocally proved that non-locality is absolutely real.
That is mind-blowing.
Whatever you do to measure the one photon instantly determines the state of the other, even if they are miles apart. There is no physical signal crossing the space between them. They act as a single, unified system despite the distance.
And the sources mention that researchers haven't just done this with tiny photons of light. They've done it with electrons, whole atoms, and even these massive structures called buckyballs.
Made of 60 carbon atoms.
Right. There's a great quote from physicist John Clauser in the book where he tells Targ, "It might be impossible to keep anything in a box anymore."
Because the boundaries of physical reality are just porous.
Yeah.
That is the core of non-locality. It shatters the Newtonian view of the universe as a collection of separate, isolated billiard balls bouncing off each other.
Now, I really want to stop here and clarify a massive point for you listening, because this is probably the most common misconception people have when they hear about remote viewing or telepathy.
Absolutely.
When we talk about mind-to-mind connections, we are not talking about mental radio.
That is a critical distinction to make.
People always assume that the brain is like a cell phone tower, sending out some kind of faint electromagnetic wave, like a radio broadcast that another brain picks up. But Targ explicitly states this cannot be true. Let's talk about the inverse square law.
Yes, because that totally debunks the mental radio idea.
Exactly. If I turn on a flashlight or broadcast a radio signal, what happens to that signal as it travels outward?
It degrades. Any electromagnetic signal propagating through three-dimensional space follows the inverse square law.
Meaning
Meaning that if you double the distance from the source, the intensity of the signal isn't just cut in half. It drops to 1/4 of its original strength.
it drops off exponentially.
Right. A radio signal 10 miles away is 100 times weaker than it is at 1 mile.
So if extrasensory perception were an electromagnetic signal, if my brain was just broadcasting radio waves, a psychic connection between someone in San Francisco and someone in Moscow would be hundreds of millions of times weaker than a connection between two people sitting across a table from each other.
It would fade to static almost immediately.
But the data from the Stanford Research Institute shows something completely different.
Entirely different. When they conducted remote viewing experiments over distances of thousands of miles, there was absolutely zero decline in accuracy.
Zero decline.
The statistical hit rate for a target in the next room was identical to the hit rate for a target on the other side of the planet. Distance literally does not matter.
Because the signal doesn't degrade.
Because, mathematically speaking, there is no signal traveling through physical space.
If there is no signal traveling through space, how on earth is the information getting from point A to point B?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the theoretical models physicists use to explain a zero-distance reality. Targ points us to the work of one of the greatest theoretical physicists of the 20th century, David Bohm,
Okay.
and his concept of the holographic universe.
Holographic universe.
Bohm suggested that our everyday reality, the 3D world of separate objects that we can touch and measure, is just the explicate order.
The explicate order.
Right, it is the unfolded superficial level of reality. But beneath that is the primary order of the universe, which he called the implicate order.
And in the implicate order,
In the implicate order, everything is unfolded into everything else.
I'm going to need a really good analogy for the implicate order because my brain just short-circuited trying to picture things folded into everything else.
Let's use the physical hologram analogy that Bohm himself used. Think about a regular photograph on a piece of film.
Okay, got a picture on my head.
If you take scissors and cut that photograph in half, you lose half the image. If it's a picture of a dog, you might just have the tail and lose the head.
Makes sense.
But a holographic piece of film is fundamentally different. If you take a piece of film containing a hologram and cut it in half and then shine a laser through it, you do not get half the picture.
You don't.
No, you still get the entire picture of the dog. It might be at a slightly lower resolution, but the whole image is there. If you cut it into 100 tiny pieces, every single piece still contains the entire image.
So every piece contains the whole.
Precisely. Bohm argued that the universe is structured the exact same way. Every single piece of the universe contains the whole universe within it.
Wow.
Therefore, all the space and all of time is potentially totally available to your consciousness exactly where you are sitting right now. You don't have to send your mind to Moscow. The information of Moscow is already enfolded in the space right in front of you.
That is staggering to think about. And the book mentions another model that helps map this out mathematically.
Right, Elizabeth Rauscher's model.
Yes. Targ worked with this theoretical physicist named Elizabeth Rauscher using a geometric framework called complex Minkowski space.
It sounds incredibly dense.
It does, but the concept is actually beautiful. They expand our standard model of space-time. Usually we think of 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions of space, up, down, left, right, forward, backward, and 1 dimension of time.
Right, our standard physical reality.
Rauscher's model expands that into an 8-dimensional model by adding 4 complex or imaginary dimensions.
And I know imaginary sounds like they just made it up, but in mathematics, imaginary numbers are very real and functional tools.
They're essential for advanced physics.
Absolutely. Think of standard 4D spacetime as a flat piece of paper with 2 dots drawn on opposite ends.
Okay, 2 dots far apart.
To get from one dot to the other, you have to draw a long line across the paper. That represents distance and time.
A journey.
Right. But in an 8-dimensional model, you introduce new geometric axes. It is the mathematical equivalent of folding that piece of paper in half so the 2 dots are touching.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. Through this complex 8-space geometry, the math shows that there is always a pathway, what physicists call a world line, that allows a viewer to connect to a remote target with 0 spatial distance and 0 temporal distance.
You are fundamentally contiguous with the target. You are touching it.
Which brings us to a really fun transition. The math is elegant, and the theories are mind-expanding. But if you're a researcher at Stanford in the 1970s working on a government grant, you can't just put 8-dimensional space in a petri dish.
No, you cannot.
How did they actually test this in a physical room with real human beings? Because the daily operations of the SRI experiments are legendary.
Paint that picture for us. What did this actually look like day to day?
Well, we are talking about highly controlled double-blind laboratory conditions. A typical experiment would look like this. A subject, the viewer, is placed in an electrically shielded, soundproof room at the SRI facility in Menlo Park, California.
Usually with an interviewer sitting with them.
Right. Meanwhile, a target team is randomly assigned a geographical location from a pool of hundreds of possible sites.
The target team physically drives to that location.
And at a free-range time, the viewer in the soundproof room is asked to describe where the target team is standing.
And the person sitting in the room with the viewer, the interviewer, doesn't know the answer either, right?
Correct. So they can't accidentally drop hints. It is strictly double-blind.
The viewer might start sketching out shapes, describing the texture of the ground, the feeling of the environment, maybe the presence of water or large geometric structures.
And later, independent judges take those descriptions and try to match them blindly to a list of the locations.
The statistical significance of these matches over years of testing is staggering. They successfully viewed hidden objects, classified military bases in other countries, and assisted in high-profile criminal cases.
Let's talk about those real-world examples, because the sources detail some cases that read like pure fiction. The Patty Hearst kidnapping is probably the most famous one.
It's a phenomenal example of applied remote viewing. In 1974, the heiress Patty Hearst was kidnapped by a radical group called the Symbionese Liberation Army.
The police were desperate.
They had no leads, and it was a massive national news story. The Berkeley Police Department actually reached out to the researchers at SRI for help.
And SRI brings in a viewer named Pat Price. Now, I love the character of Pat Price.
He's fascinating.
He wasn't some mystical guru sitting on a mountaintop. He was a former police commissioner from Burbank, California.
That cop.
A tough, no-nonsense guy who just happened to have this extraordinary natural psychic ability.
That's a great detail. Price sits down at the SRI lab with a map. He doesn't go into a deep trance. He just closes his eyes and starts describing the kidnappers.
And he doesn't just give vague psychic hotline generalities.
No, he describes specific, actionable details. He describes the cars they were driving. He describes the rings on the kidnappers' fingers. And most importantly, he pinpoints a specific location where he believes they are hiding or had hidden.
And didn't he actually lead the police to a specific physical location?
Yes. Based on his viewing, the police actually located the station wagon the kidnappers had used.
Incredible.
The details Price provided genuinely aided the investigation, demonstrating that this wasn't just a statistical parlor trick happening in a vacuum. It had real-world, tactical application.
Okay, finding a kidnapped person is incredible. But the example that really made my jaw drop was when Targ and his team decided to test this against the financial market.
Oh, a silver market.
Yes. They used precognitive remote viewing to forecast changes in the silver commodity market.
Predicting a commodity market is arguably the ultimate test of precognition. A financial market is governed by millions of variables, human emotion, global news, and pure noise.
Right.
If you can predict that consistently, you are doing something extraordinary.
So how did they set that up? Because I assume the viewers aren't just meditating and seeing a ticker tape with the price of silver floating in their mind.
You assume correctly. They used a protocol called associative remote viewing, or ARV. It's an incredibly clever workaround for the problem you just mentioned. Numbers and letters are notoriously difficult to see psychically.
They are.
Yes. So instead of asking a viewer to predict a price, the researchers create a code. Let's say we want to know if silver will go up, go down, or stay the same next Tuesday.
Okay.
The researchers find 3 very distinct, highly visual objects, say a red apple, a fuzzy teddy bear, and a glass bottle. They secretly assign one object to up, one to down, and one to same.
But the viewer doesn't know what the objects are or what they represent.
Exactly. The viewer is just told, describe the object you are going to be handed next Wednesday.
Wow.
The viewer uses precognition to look a week into the future and describe the object they will hold in their hands. If the viewer describes a fuzzy brown object with button eyes, the researchers know they will be handing the viewer the teddy bear next Wednesday.
They check their secret list, see the teddy bears assigned to silver goes down, and they make their trade accordingly.
And it worked. They made a significant profit, specifically to prove the methodology was sound in the real world. It was so successful, it was even written up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
But reading all of this, the most burning question I have, and I'm sure the question everyone listening has right now, is how does a person actually do this?
How do you separate an actual psychic signal coming from the implicate order from your own noisy imagination?
Yeah.
That was the biggest hurdle the SRI team faced in training new viewers. Targ's colleague, a brilliantly talented artist and psychic named Ingo Swann, developed a precise vocabulary to address this exact problem.
Right. Analytical overlay.
He identified the absolute enemy of remote viewing. He called it analytical overlay, or AOL for short.
Mental noise.
Mental noise, yes. Analytical overlay is the brain's desperate, automatic attempt to analyze, name, or guess what it is perceiving before it has all the data. Our brains are meaning-making machines.
They hate ambiguity.
They despise it. So the moment a faint psychic impression comes in, the left hemisphere of the brain rushes in to categorize it.
I love the analogy of waking up in the dark. You wake up at 3 a.m., you look in the corner of your bedroom, and your brain instantly screams, there is a tall man in a trench coat standing there.
Yes.
Your heart races, you turn on the lamp, and it's just your laundry piled over a chair.
Exactly.
Your brain took a vague aesthetic. Tall, dark, draped, and aggressively named it based on fear and past experiences.
Yeah.
That is analytical overlay.
That is a perfect example, and the exact same thing happens in remote viewing. Let's say a viewer is sitting in the lab and they are psychically perceiving the target location miles away. The actual target is a long metal trough suspended in the air, full of holes.
Yeah.
The viewer starts picking up the sensory data.
Yeah.
They feel something metallic, they sense a U-shape, they feel the concept of emptiness or holes. That is the true psychic signal.
That's settled.
Suddenly, the viewer's analytical mind kicks in and says, oh, metal, U-shaped holes. I'm looking at a colander in a kitchen, or it's a water tower.
The moment they name it, they've lost it.
Precisely. They have just engaged in analytical overlay. They've stopped experiencing the raw, unfiltered data and started intellectualizing and guessing.
Which ruins the data.
Targ stresses that in remote viewing, you must only describe the aesthetic impact. You describe the shapes, the dimensions, the textures, the feeling of temperature, but you must never, ever name the object. The rule is describe, don't name.
What's really fascinating here is how beautifully this struggle against mental noise maps onto ancient spiritual practices. The book makes this connection explicitly.
It does.
Targ connects the battle against analytical overlay perfectly to the Dogen Buddhist concepts of conditioned awareness versus naked awareness.
Let's expand on that because Dzogchen is a profound tradition. It is considered by many to be the highest teaching in Tibetan Buddhism.
The core premise is that our natural state of mind is pure, vast, and completely limitless.
But we don't experience that because we're trapped in conditioned awareness.
Right. Conditioned awareness is our everyday waking state. It's the state where we are constantly judging, naming, and categorizing everything we see based on our past traumas, our societal training, and our ego's preferences.
We don't see a tree, we see lumber or shade or an oak.
We are constantly laying a grid of concepts over reality. It is exactly the same as analytical overlay.
And the goal of Dzogchen, much like the goal of a successful remote viewer, is to slip into what they call naked awareness.
Naked awareness.
Naked awareness is perceiving the universe directly, intimately, without the conceptual filter of your ego. It is resting in the pure experience of the present moment without needing to label it.
Remote viewing essentially requires you to operationalize this ancient spiritual state.
Yes. You have to profoundly quiet the mind to hear the subtle signal of the universe.
And once you quiet the mind that deeply, something really strange happens to the boundaries of time. We touched on precognition earlier with the silver market, but I want to dig into the physics of seeing the future, because this is where my mind really started doing backflips.
It's a trip.
Karg asserts that mathematically and practically, it is statistically no more difficult to look a short distance into the future than it is to look at a hidden target in the present.
It is a staggering claim, but the data supports it. The book leans heavily on the research done at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, commonly known as PEER.
Right.
This lab was run by Robert John, the former dean of engineering at Princeton, and his colleague Brenda Dunn. They were incredibly rigorous. Over a period of years, they conducted 227 formal experiments in precognitive remote viewing.
Okay, explain the exact setup of these precognition experiments, because when we were talking about seeing the future, the protocols have to be bulletproof.
The setup was similar to the SRI remote viewing, but with a crucial temporal twist. A viewer is in the lab. A target person, let's call them the agent, is going to drive to a random location.
Okay.
But here is the catch. The viewer is asked to describe the location days before the agent even knows where they are going.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt here to play the role of the ultimate skeptic.
Yeah, please do.
If someone tells me a guy in a room guessed where a guy in a park was going to be 4 days later, my immediate thought is that the experiment must be flawed. How do we know the agent didn't unconsciously choose a location that matched the viewer's description?
Or how do we know the researchers weren't tipping them off?
Exactly. How did Jan and Dunn lock this down?
That is exactly the right question to ask. The protocols were designed to eliminate human choice entirely. The target locations were not chosen by a person.
They weren't.
No, they were selected by a true random number generator, a machine relying on radioactive decay or electronic noise, which is fundamentally unpredictable. The random number generator wouldn't even select the target until after the viewer had already recorded their session, locked it in a safe, and registered it with the researchers.
Wow.
There was absolutely no way the agent or the viewer could know the target beforehand because the information didn't exist in the physical universe yet.
And what were the results of those 227 trials?
The statistical results departed from chance by odds of 1 in 100 billion. Let that number register.
1 in 100 billion.
1 in 100 billion. The data overwhelmingly showed that the viewers were accurately describing the future location of the agent days before the computer even selected the site.
Okay, so the data is rock solid. But that immediately introduces a massive philosophical headache.
The intervention paradox.
Yes. Or what sci-fi fans call the grandfather paradox.
Let's explore that paradox. How would you frame it?
Okay, let's say I do a precognitive remote viewing session. I look into next week, and I vividly see a future where I die in a horrible car crash because my front tire blows out on the highway.
A dark example, but okay.
I see the exact stretch of road. Because of that vision, I am terrified. I take my car to the mechanic the next morning. He discovers a massive defect in the tire. He replaces it. And next week, I drive safely past that stretch of road. I don't die. But didn't I just break reality? If my vision of the future caused the future not to happen, how did I see it in the first place? What exactly was I looking at if that future never occurred?
It is the ultimate puzzle of time travel and precognition. If the future is fixed and immutable, you can't change the tire. You are doomed by mechanical determinism.
But if you can change the tire, then the future isn't fixed, so how can you see it?
Exactly. Targ's view on this is incredibly elegant, and it relies on quantum mechanics. He argues that precognition is not a fatalistic prophecy carved in stone. You are not seeing the only future. You are seeing a forecast.
A forecast, like the weather.
Exactly. When a meteorologist says there is an 80% chance of rain tomorrow, they are not dictating the future. They are looking at the current state of the atmosphere, the pressure systems, the humidity, and calculating the most probable trajectory.
That makes so much sense.
Targ argues that when you use precognition, your consciousness is accessing the complex Minkowski space we talked about earlier. You are perceiving the most probable world line or trajectory based on the current state of the universe.
So, by seeing the crash car, I am just seeing the trajectory of the defective tire.
Yes. And here is the beautiful part. By receiving that non-local information, you actually gain the free will to intervene. You see the probable world line, you consciously decide you don't like it, and you choose to act differently in the present.
You switch to a different world line.
In Targ's view, your psychic perception of the future actually rescues you from mechanical determinism. It gives you the ultimate agency.
I love that. It makes precognition a tool for empowerment rather than a crystal ball of doom. But the physics of time gets even stranger in this book when we look at the opposite direction.
Retrocausality.
Yes, what about retrocausality? The idea that the present can reach back and influence the past.
This might be the most challenging concept in the entire book for the rational mind to accept. The text highlights the astonishing experiments of a physicist named Helmut Schmidt.
And again, we have to look closely at the physical setup of these experiments because they sound impossible.
Walk us through a Helmut Schmidt experiment.
Well, Schmidt was fascinated by the interaction between human consciousness and random quantum events. He built automated machines called random number generators. You can think of them as high-tech electronic coin flippers.
Right.
They use a quantum source, like the radioactive decay of strontium-90, to generate a completely random string of ones and zeros.
So it's 50-50, pure chance.
Pure chance. Now, Schmidt would let this machine run in an empty room, generating thousands of ones and zeros, and he would record the output directly onto punch paper tape or a computer disk. No human being was in the room.
No one looked at the data.
It was recorded and immediately locked in a safe.
Okay, so the data is generated, recorded, and physically exists in a safe. The past has happened.
Exactly. Now, days or even weeks later, Schmidt would bring a test subject into the lab. He would take the disk out of the safe, hook it up to a display screen, and tell the subject, I want you to focus your attention on this screen, and I want you to try to make the machine produce more ones than zeros.
The subject concentrates, trying to force the display to show more ones.
But wait, they aren't interacting with a live machine. They're looking at pre-recorded data from last week. They're trying to change a recording.
Yes, and statistically, over thousands of trials, they succeeded.
It's hard to believe.
When Schmidt analyzed the tapes after the subjects focused their attention, the data showed a statistically significant deviation from chance. There were more ones than zeros. The subjects were altering the data backwards in time.
The intention they set on a Thursday was reaching back into the previous week and affecting the quantum decay of the strontium-90 at the exact moment it was being recorded.
That is terrifying and amazing. Is there any catch to this? Like, does it always work?
There is one massive caveat, and it is crucial to the physics of this. It only works if the pre-recorded data remains completely unobserved by any conscious mind until the moment of the subject's intention.
Oh, wow.
If an assistant accidentally peeked at the paper tape before putting it in the safe, the data was collapsed or fixed into reality. The retrocausality would fail. But as long as the data remained in a state of unobserved quantum potential, the future consciousness of the subject could reach back and shape it.
It implies that we live in this incredibly dynamic spiderweb of space-time. The future is constantly tugging on the present, and the present is constantly tugging on the past, rearranging the unobserved details of reality.
And if that is true, if we can outflow our intention backwards in time to affect the output of a machine, it stands to reason that we can outflow our intention across space in the present to affect another human being.
Which brings us to the deeply profound topic of distant healing and mind over matter.
This raises an important question. If we are fundamentally interconnected, if non-locality is real, how does that completely rewrite our understanding of medicine and human health?
Targ introduces the work of a visionary physician named Dr. Larry Dossey to help frame this. Dossey categorizes the history of medicine into 3 distinct eras.
Break those down for us. What is Era 1?
Era I is the purely mechanical and physical approach to medicine. This is the Newtonian view. It treats the human body exactly like a clockwork machine. If a gear is broken, you take it out or oil it.
Surgery, pharmaceuticals, antibiotics?
Exactly. It is incredibly effective for acute trauma, but it assumes consciousness has absolutely nothing to do with health.
Which we know is incomplete. So Era 2 adds the mind back in.
Correct. Era 2 emerged when we started recognizing the mind-body connection. This is psychosomatic medicine. It acknowledges that a person's own mental state directly affects their own physical health.
Right. If you are chronically stressed, your brain releases cortisol, your immune system is suppressed, and you get sick.
If you practice meditation or biofeedback, you can lower your blood pressure. The mind affects the body, but it is still confined to a single individual.
My mind affects my body.
Right. But Era 3 is where we are heading now, based on Targ's research. Era 3 is non-local medicine.
Non-local medicine.
This is the era where the consciousness of one person can directly, physically affect the body of another person, regardless of the physical distance between them.
And again, this isn't just New Age theory. The sources are packed with rigorous clinical data proving this happens. Let's look at some of those experiments because we need to ground this. The book mentions Douglas Dean's experiments using a plethysmograph.
Right.
What is a plethysmograph, and how did he use it to test this?
A plethysmograph is a medical device that measures subtle changes in blood volume in a specific part of the body, usually a finger. It can detect the tiny contractions and dilations of your blood vessels.
Which are controlled by your autonomic nervous system.
Right, the part of your nervous system that reacts to stress or relaxation without your conscious control. Dean would hook a subject up to a plethysmograph in a quiet room. Then, in another room far away, an agent would be given a stack of index cards with names on them.
Some names were strangers, and some were people the subject deeply loved or strongly disliked.
Highly emotional connections.
Exactly. The agent would randomly flip over a card. If the card had a stranger's name, the agent just read it. But if the agent flipped over the name of a person the subject loved, the agent would vividly imagine that person, focusing intense thought and emotion.
At the exact moment the distant agent focused on that emotionally charged name, the plethysmograph on the subject's finger would instantly register a significant change in blood volume.
The subject's autonomic nervous system was reacting to the thoughts of a person in another room.
Even though the subject had no conscious awareness that it was happening.
So our bodies are physically reacting to the thoughts of others. That is wild. And William Broad took this even further with cells outside the body, right? He did hemolysis experiments.
Yes, William Broad's work is fascinating. Hemolysis is the bursting or dying of red blood cells. Broad would take test tubes of human red blood cells and place them in a saline solution that would slowly cause them to die.
Okay.
He then asked participants in another room to focus their attention on specific test tubes, trying to mentally protect the cells and slow down the rate of death.
And it worked.
It worked consistently. The participants successfully and statistically significantly slowed the rate of cell death in the targeted tubes compared to the control tubes that received no intention.
I read a really interesting detail about that experiment in the source. Broad noted that when participants were trying to protect blood cells that had been drawn from their own bodies, they were significantly more successful than when they tried to protect the blood cells of strangers.
It suggests this kind of built-in non-local resonance with our own biological material.
But as fascinating as the blood cells are, the most moving and deeply personal core of this entire book centers around human beings. It centers around Russell Targ's own daughter, Dr. Elizabeth Targ.
It does, and this is where the science becomes deeply emotional. Elizabeth Targ was a brilliant, open-hearted psychiatrist and a highly respected researcher in psychoneuroimmunology, the study of how the mind affects the immune system.
She was courageous enough to take this Era III non-local medicine and test it in the most rigorous way possible on a vulnerable population. She designed a double-blind, randomized clinical study on the effects of distant healing prayer on advanced AIDS patients.
Let's talk about the protocols for that, because studying prayer in a lab usually raises a lot of eyebrows.
She knew it would, so she made it ironclad. She took a group of advanced AIDS patients and randomly divided them into two groups. One group would receive standard medical care. The other group would receive standard medical care plus distant healing.
The healers were recruited from across the country.
Christian monks, Native American shamans, Jewish rabbis, Buddhist practitioners, and secular energy healers. The healers were given photographs and the first names of the patients in the healing group.
But the patients didn't know if they were being prayed for or not.
Exactly. It was strictly double-blind. The patients didn't know which group they were in, and the doctors treating them didn't know either.
And the results were astounding. After 6 months, the patients who received the distant healing had significantly improved health outcomes.
They had fewer opportunistic illnesses, lower severity of symptoms, and significantly reduced hospitalizations compared to the control group.
The data was so rigorous and statistically significant that it was published in the Western Journal of Medicine, a mainstream, peer-reviewed medical journal.
It's an incredible legacy, and it is incredibly touching because, as the source material reveals, Russell Targ actually wrote this book shortly after Elizabeth passed away.
She died of a brain tumor called a glioblastoma at the tragically young age of 40.
Her life, her rigorous scientific work, and her deep spiritual dedication clearly inspired her father to look beyond the raw physics of ESP. He stopped asking just, how does this work, and started asking, what is the ultimate purpose of these abilities?
That transition is the philosophical heart of the book. For Targ, the ultimate purpose of remote viewing isn't finding lost car keys, and it isn't making money on the silver market. It is an experiential pathway to spiritual awakening.
He takes the hard data of non-local physics and uses it to validate the deepest insights of ancient philosophy and religion. He essentially builds a bridge between the laboratory and the monastery.
I'd love to trace those connections because he synthesizes so much ancient wisdom here, and he does it really beautifully. He points to the pinnacle of Hindu Vedic thought first.
The ancient texts of India have a central concept, the equation that Atman equals Brahman.
Let's unpack that. Atman refers to the individual innermost consciousness, the spark of awareness inside you.
And Brahman.
Brahman refers to the universal, infinite, cosmic consciousness that creates and sustains everything. The great realization of the Vedas is that these two are not separate. Atman is Brahman. The drop of water is the ocean.
What blew my mind was learning that Erwin Schrödinger, the physicist who formulated the wave equation for quantum mechanics and won the Nobel Prize, actually considered this Vedic equation of Atman and Brahman to be the grandest of all thoughts.
He looked at the mathematics of the quantum world and arrived at the exact same conclusion as mystics sitting in caves 2,500 years ago. There is only one consciousness.
Targ also draws heavily on Buddhism, specifically to explain the paradoxes of reality. Western thought is heavily reliant on Aristotelian logic. We use a two-valued system. A statement is either true or it is false.
Something is A or it is not A. A table is solid or it is not solid. But this kind of rigid binary logic fails completely when you look at the quantum level.
Right, because is light a wave or a particle? In a two-valued logic system, it has to be one or the other. But quantum mechanics says it's kind of both, depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. So Targ introduces the four-valued logic developed by the 2nd century Buddhist master Nagarjuna.
Okay, Nagarjuna.
Nagarjuna realized that reality is far too complex for binary categories. In his system, a statement about the world can have four possible values. It can be true, it can be not true, it can be both true and not true, or it can be neither true nor not true.
That sounds like a riddle designed to give a philosopher a headache.
It does, until you apply it to modern physics. Is an electron a particle? Yes, it's true under certain measurements. Is it a wave? Yes, it's not true that it's just a particle. It is both true and not true simultaneously.
Nagarjuna's four-valued logic perfectly accommodates the paradoxes of quantum mechanics. And more importantly, it accommodates the paradox of human existence.
Explain how that applies to us as people.
It answers the ultimate question. How can I be a distinct individual person sitting here talking to you with my own memories and my own body, and at the exact same time be absolutely connected to the infinite whole of the universe?
In Aristotelian logic, that's impossible.
In Buddhist four-valued logic, it is the natural state of reality. You are both separate and not separate.
We see this exact same idea echoed across different traditions. Aldous Huxley called it the perennial philosophy, the idea that a single, unified consciousness is the fundamental building block of the universe, and it keeps popping up in every culture.
Carl Jung, the great psychologist, called it the collective unconscious, a shared, deep reservoir of human experience that we're all tapped into.
But here's the thing that really struck me. Realizing this interconnectedness isn't always a pleasant experience. In fact, for a lot of people, it is terrifying.
It induces a profound psychological terror. The idea of a porous mind, the idea of telepathic intimacy where your thoughts are not entirely your own, is deeply threatening to the ego.
Exactly. Our ego screams, I am special, I am separate, I am safe in my little physical fortress inside my skull, and no one can get in here.
Targ makes a brilliant observation about this. He points out that science has basically been battering the human ego for centuries. First, Copernicus comes along and tells us we aren't the center of the physical universe. The Earth goes around the sun.
The ego takes a hit.
Then Darwin comes along and tells us we aren't a special, separate creation. We are cousins to the apes and part of the animal kingdom. Another hit.
Then Freud comes along and tells us we aren't even the masters of our own minds. We are driven by subconscious urges we don't even understand.
Right. And now Russell Targ and the remote viewers come along and deliver the final blow. Your private thoughts, your physical boundaries, your little fortress, it is completely permeable. You are not separate from the person sitting next to you.
The ego fights that realization tooth and nail because it feels like a kind of death. But the deeper meaning here, the message Targ wants to convey, is that this death of the ego is actually ultimate liberation.
He aligns with the Dzogchen masters who argue that the illusion of separation is the root of all human suffering. Think about it. Why do we suffer?
We suffer because we cling to the idea of a separate self.
And a separate self has to constantly fight for survival. It has to fight for resources, it has to fight for status, it has to fight for love, because it believes it is isolated in a hostile universe.
Yeah.
If you are separate, you are vulnerable.
But as our personal egos are diminished, as we realize through the physics of non-locality that we are just nodes in a single, vast, interconnected consciousness, our actual concept of who we truly are is massively enhanced.
We realize we are the whole ocean.
We trade the anxiety and fear of isolation for the absolute peace of total interconnectedness.
Which brings us beautifully to the so what of this entire deep dive. How do you, listening right now as you drive to work or fold laundry, actually use this? What are the practical reflections for daily life?
Targ gives us a massive overarching idea to hold on to. His ultimate conclusion from a lifetime of physics and psychic research is a single sentence. We are not a body, we have a body.
That's the core shift in identity. We are limitless awareness, temporarily residing as a physical body to experience this specific timeline. If we can truly tap into that awareness, we realize the universe isn't a random, cold, hostile vacuum. It is fundamentally a safe place, woven together by an oceanic, interconnected love.
But getting to that realization requires practice. You can't just read it in a book and instantly feel it. Targ says to experience that peace, we have to do the hardest thing imaginable. We have to silence the chattering mind.
We have to stop the endless noise of conditioned awareness and analytical overlay in our daily lives.
And he offers very practical psychological tools for doing this. One of the most powerful concepts he discusses is the importance of letting go of the story.
This part hit me really hard. We all have a story about who we think we are. The Sufi tradition, specifically through the teachings of the Enneagram, calls this our business card. We walk around handing out our psychological business card to everyone we meet.
What does your business card say? I am a successful lawyer. I am a victim of a terrible childhood. I am the smart one in the family. I'm the one who is always sick.
Right, and we lavish so much attention on this story. We defend it, we curate it on social media, we argue about it.
But Targ points out that this story is just a fixation. It's an artifact from the past. It is the ultimate analytical overlay of your own identity. It traps you.
He gives a haunting, real-world example of how dangerous the ego's story can be. He talks about aerospace engineers who worked at Lockheed Martin.
This is a sobering statistic. He discusses men who worked their entire adult lives at Lockheed. For 30 or 40 years, their entire identity, their entire story was, I am a brilliant Lockheed engineer.
They woke up every day, put on the badge, and lived that story. But then they retire.
And what happens when they retire? They lose their story, they wake up on a Monday morning, and they aren't the brilliant engineer anymore. To their ego, they become nothing.
And Targ points out that statistically, these men who deeply identified with their jobs would often die significantly sooner than actuarially predicted.
Their bodies literally failed because their ego lost its narrative.
It proves how dangerous it is to equate your infinite awareness with a temporary social role. To dismantle that story before it destroys us, Targ leans heavily on a spiritual text called A Course in Miracles.
The core practical teaching of the Course is the power to choose again. The Course argues a radical premise. Events in the physical world have no inherent meaning whatsoever. None.
That is tough to swallow at first. What do you mean events have no meaning?
It means we assign the meaning to every single event based on our lifelong conditioning, our past traumas, and our fears. Let's use a mundane example. You were driving on the highway, and someone aggressively cuts you off in traffic.
The physical event is just two metal boxes moving through space.
But your ego instantly assigns a meaning. That person is disrespecting me. They are endangering my life. People are selfish.
And as a result of that assigned meaning, you suffer anger, your blood pressure spikes, and your day is ruined.
Exactly. But the Course says you have the power to stop in that exact moment and choose again. You can recognize that your perception of disrespect is just an idea held in your mind. A miracle, in the context of this teaching, is not parting the Red Sea or walking on water. A miracle is simply a shift in perception.
You choose to perceive the event through a lens of unconditioned, naked awareness, without the baggage of your ego's defensive story. Maybe that person is rushing to the hospital. Maybe they're just terrified. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you drop the narrative that causes you suffering.
And the most practical daily application of this shift in perception is forgiveness. Targ writes about this very movingly. He notes that holding on to grievances, resentments, and anger is incredibly destructive to the person holding them.
Carrying a grudge is, as he vividly puts it, giving the person who hurt you a lifetime of free rent in your mind.
Why would you let someone you dislike live rent-free in your head? It's absurd when you frame it that way.
It is. You don't forgive people because they necessarily deserve it or because what they did was okay. You forgive them because, for your own mental health and spiritual liberation, you want to lay down the heavy burden of the past so you can be free and present right now.
It is incredibly profound, and it is amazing to see a physicist arrive at forgiveness as a logical conclusion of quantum interconnectedness.
To wrap up our exploration, let's ground this deep dive in the exact words of the text, because Targ pulls from some incredible thinkers to support his thesis. We've pulled 4 fascinating quotes from the source material that we think perfectly encapsulate these ideas. Let's read and analyze them.
The first quote is from Erwin Schrödinger, the Nobel physicist we mentioned earlier. He wrote, "Consciousness is a singular of which the plural is unknown. There is only one thing, and that which seems to be a plurality is merely a series of different aspects of this one thing, produced by a deception, the Indian Maya, as in a gallery of mirrors."
It still stuns me to hear a 20th century quantum physicist writing like an ancient mystic. He is looking at the hard math of quantum mechanics, the behavior of electrons, and concluding that there's literally only one consciousness in the entire universe.
Our feeling of being separate individuals, me talking to you, the listener listening to us, is an optical illusion. It's a trick of the light in a cosmic gallery of mirrors. We are all the exact same awareness looking at itself from billions of different angles.
The second quote takes that idea of awareness and tells us how to access it. It is from Father Thomas Keating, a revered Catholic priest and monk who popularized the practice of centering prayer. He said, "God's first language is silence. Everything else is a bad translation."
I love the humor in that, calling human language a bad translation. It connects perfectly to everything Targ teaches about the need to drop mental noise and analytical overlay.
If you want to access non-local awareness, if you want to be a remote viewer, or if you want to experience the divine, you cannot do it by talking. You can't do it by analyzing, categorizing, or naming. The moment you name the divine, you've put it in a box. You can only experience it by stepping into the quiet, wordless void of naked awareness.
Our third quote is from the great English poet John Milton from his epic Paradise Lost. He wrote, "A mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven."
This relates so directly to the Dzogchen Buddhist idea we discussed, the idea of samsara and nirvana. Samsara is our everyday suffering, anxiety, and endless striving. Nirvana is absolute, blissful peace and liberation.
But Buddhism teaches that these are not two different physical places. You don't die and go to one or the other. They're just two different perspectives projected onto the exact same reality. Your mind is its own place.
You have the power right now to choose again. You can make a heaven out of your current mundane circumstances simply by dropping your story and shifting your perception.
And our final quote brings us back to the physics that makes all of this possible. It is from physicist David Bohm, explaining the physical mechanism that allows remote viewing to exist. The essential features of the implicate order are that the whole universe is in some way enfolded in everything, and that each thing is enfolded in the whole.
That is the holographic universe in a nutshell. Every piece contains the whole. The universe is inside you, literally and mathematically. Okay, we want to leave you, the listener, with some things to dawn on. Based on everything we've unpacked, here are 5 discussion questions. These are perfect if you're reading this book with a club, or honestly, they're just great for staring up at the ceiling at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep.
Question number 1. If you could unequivocally prove that your thoughts could influence someone else's physical body from miles away, as the distant healing data with blood cells in AIDS patients strongly suggests, what ethical boundaries would you set for your own thinking? Does thinking a hateful thought become a physical assault?
Oh, that's heavy. Question number 2. Targ suggests that holding on to our personal stories, our egos, our careers, our past traumas, is the primary cause of our suffering. How does the practice of remote viewing fundamentally challenge the concept of the individual ego?
Question number 3, exploring the physics of time. Consider the Princeton precognition experiments and Helmut Schmidt's retrocausality data. If the future can retroactively influence the present and the present can reach back to alter the past, how does this alter our everyday understanding of free will and destiny? Are we writing the script or just reading it?
Question number 4. Why do you think mainstream science is so resistant to the data on non-local consciousness, even when it is presented by highly reputable physicists from places like Stanford and Princeton? What is the scientific establishment so afraid of losing?
And final question number 5. A Course in Miracles says we give all the meaning there is to everything we experience. How might your daily life change if you actively practiced choosing again every single time you felt anger, fear, or resentment?
So what does this all mean? We have gone on an incredible mind-bending journey today. We started with Cold War psychic spies sitting in soundproof rooms in the laboratories of the Stanford Research Institute. We dove into the bizarre, non-intuitive mechanics of quantum interconnectedness, eight-dimensional space-time, and the death of the inverse square law.
And we ended up in the realms of the Buddhism, A Course in Miracles, and the profound realization that we are fundamentally made of limitless, loving awareness.
Targ's work shows us that exploring the outer edges of human perception isn't just about proving that ESP exists in a lab. It's about breaking out of the cage of our own conditioned minds. It is about realizing that separation is an illusion, and that we are already deeply connected to everything and everyone we will ever need.
It is a beautiful synthesis of science and spirit. And to leave you with one final, lingering thought that builds on Targ's premise, we've talked about how our physical senses act as a reducing valve. Our eyes, our ears, our brains, they are filters that drastically limit our infinite non-local perception down to this narrow, local 3D reality, just so we can function and survive in the physical world without being overwhelmed.
But if that is true, what happens tonight when you fall asleep? When that sensory reducing valve completely shuts off and your consciousness untethers from the physical demands of your body, where or when will you go?
What a fantastic, haunting thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the limitless mind. We really hope it sparked some new ideas, challenged a few of your assumptions about reality, and gave you a whole new way to think about the invisible space between us. Take care of yourselves, remember to drop the story, and we'll see you next time.